Imagine, imagine for a second that you're handed just a virtually impossible writing assignment. You are tasked with creating a single cohesive narrative that captures an entire century of really turbulent, chaotic history.
Right, which is already a massive undertaking.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to fit in the collapse of an empire, the rise of competing superpowers, brutal warfare, massive technological shifts. And you also have to juggle a cast of nearly 1,000 real historical
Well,
figures.
1,000. That's just wild.
It is. Politicians, generals, assassins, ordinary citizens. But the real catch is that you have to make the story so intensely gripping that centuries from now, people aren't just casually reading it. I mean, they are basing their daily slang on it,
Yeah.
using it as a literal military manual. And they're even building religious temples to its characters.
I mean, it sounds like a thought experiment designed to torture a novelist, honestly. The sheer scale of a project like that just defies how we typically consume history. We usually prefer our history, neatly categorized into distinct eras or biographies. We don't usually weave it into a massive, sprawling epic that refuses to end.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is so special. Because we aren't talking about a thought experiment for you today. We are exploring a comprehensive set of sources, mostly centered around a massive Wikipedia article detailing the 14th century Chinese historical novel, Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
It's a monumental work.
It really is. And our mission today is to figure out how an 800,000-word epic basically became the literary equivalent of Shakespeare in East Asia. I mean, we are looking at a text that shaped ancient battlefields and is actively shaping modern internet culture right now.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because
Yeah.
I am just looking at the sheer volume of material here, and my first question is honestly just about the raw timeline. Like, how do you even begin to structure a story of this magnitude?
Well, you start with the rubble of an empire. The fundamental premise of the novel is, actually rooted in real documented history. It covers a period beginning in 184 AD, right, as the mighty Han Dynasty basically begins to collapse under the weight of this massive peasant uprising.
Right, the Yellow Turban Rebellion.
Exactly. It then tracks the resulting chaos over the next century, ending with the reunification of China in 280 AD. So it's roughly 100 years of fractured power, warlords vying for control, and a nation basically splitting into three rival states, Cao-Wei, Shu-Han, and Eastern Wu.
So it's a massive power vacuum and everyone is scrambling for the throne. But I know this isn't just a dry textbook, right?
Far from it. The historical skeleton actually comes from a 3rd century text called The Records of the Three Kingdoms.
Yeah.
That was written by a historian named Chen Shou.
Okay, but the novel's much later.
Right. Yeah, over 1,000 years later. The novel we are talking about today was written in the 14th century, traditionally attributed to a playwright named Luo Guanzong. He took those dry historical records and just vastly expanded them. What's fascinating here is that there's a famous quote from a Qing Dynasty historian who described Luo Guanzong's novel as being 7 parts fact and 3 parts fiction.
7 parts fact, 3 parts fiction. I mean, that feels like the golden ratio for a historical thriller. You ground the reader in undeniable reality, the real battles, the real deaths, but you leave yourself a 30% margin to invent dialogue, amplify the drama.
Yeah, add a few dramatic monologues before a sword fight.
Exactly.
And that 30% margin is where the magic happens. Luo Guanzong infused the dry history with local folklore, poetry, and moral philosophy. He gave the characters distinct psychological profiles. But here is the critical thing to understand. Luo Guanzong's draft, as brilliant as it was, isn't actually the version most people read today.
Wait, really? So the definitive version of this book isn't even the author's original cut?
No, not at all. In the 17th century, roughly 300 years after Luo Guanzong wrote his epic, 2 editors got their hands on it. A man named Mao Lun and his son, Mao Zonggang.
And they just decided to rewrite it.
Essentially, yeah. They looked at this sprawling 900,000 character manuscript and decided it needed a really severe edit. They produced what is called a recension. They ruthlessly cut the word count down to about 750,000 characters.
Wow, that is a huge chunk to just cut out.
It is. They also swapped out mediocre poetry for higher quality verse, and they structured the entire massive narrative into exactly 120 chapters.
I kind of look at what the Mao editors did through the lens of modern television. It feels like a network handing a brilliant but chaotic pilot script over to veteran showrunners.
That's a great analogy.
Right. The showrunners come in, tighten the pacing, cut the rambling monologues, and organize everything into an A plot and a B plot so the audience can actually track the themes.
That is a remarkably accurate way to view their contribution. especially regarding your point about an A plot and a B plot. The Mao editors used a technique that literary critics call interlacing.
Interlacing, like weaving things together.
Exactly. They didn't just tell history chronologically. They deliberately placed certain historical events side by side to force the reader to compare them. A brilliant example from the sources is chapter 79.
Oh, right. I remember reading about this one.
Yeah, this chapter elegantly and tragically interlaces two completely different stories about brotherhood.
Let's break that down because the contrast between these two stories is jarring. What is happening on the first side of this interlaced chapter?
So on one side, you have the warlord Liu Bei. Throughout the novel, Liu Bei is positioned as the virtuous, idealistic leader. He is bound by a sacred oath of brotherhood to his greatest general, a man named Guan Yu.
Right, the sworn brother.
But in the events leading up to this chapter, Guan Yu is killed by rival forces. Liu Bei is absolutely shattered. He is so consumed by catastrophic, grief-fueled vengeance that he just abandons all strategic sense.
He just loses it entirely.
Completely. He launches a massive military campaign to avenge his sworn brother, which leads to his own disastrous defeat at the Battle of Yiling. He essentially sacrifices his entire empire out of love for a friend.
So that's the ultimate tragic loyalty, right? Destroying yourself for a sworn brother. What do the Mao editors interlace right next to that?
They pair it with the story of Cao Pai and Cao Ji. Now, unlike Liu Bei and Guan Yu, these two are actual blood brothers. They are the sons of Liu Bei's greatest rival, the brilliant and utterly ruthless warlord Cao Cao.
And Cao Cao has just died, right?
Yes, and Cao Pi has just inherited his father's throne, and he is terrified. He knows his younger brother Cao Ji is vastly more intelligent and well-loved. So instead of showing familial loyalty, the new ruler Cao Pai actively looks for an excuse to execute his own flesh and blood.
The psychological cruelty he uses to do it is wild. He doesn't just send an assassin in the night. What does he force his brother to do?
Cao Pai hauls his younger brother in front of the court and gives him a crazy ultimatum. Cao Ji must compose a masterful poem in the exact time it takes to walk 7 steps.
7 steps. That is cinematic tension right there.
It is. If he fails to finish the poem by the 7th step, he will be executed for treason.
Your life is ticking down with literal footsteps. That's intense.
Incredibly tense. But Cao Ji, who is a brilliant poet, actually succeeds. He composes what is now known as the famous quatrain of 7 steps.
Oh, I have the translation here. He uses a metaphor about cooking, right?
Yes, boiling beans in a pot over a fire made from dried bean stems. How does it go again?
It reads, alive we sprouted from a single root. What is your rush to cook us on the fire?
That's so powerful.
Yeah, what is your rush to cook us on the fire? It's such a mundane domestic image, just cooking dinner. But he turns it into this devastating critique. He's looking at his brother, the fire, and saying, we come from the same plant. Why are you burning yourself to destroy me? It's a desperate plea for survival disguised as a recipe.
And the poem strikes Cao Pai to his core. He weeps, and he spares his brother's life. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can really see the genius of the 17th century Mao editors.
Right, by putting them next to each other.
Exactly. By placing these two narratives side by side, they elevate raw historical facts into high art. You have Liu Bei destroying his future to avenge a sworn brother, perfectly mirrored against Cao Pai, willing to murder his blood brother for a crown. The editors were so focused on drawing out these grand cyclical themes of human nature that they actually added the famous opening lines to the novel.
Wait, so the most iconic lines of the book weren't even written by the original author?
No, they weren't. The lines are, "The empire, long divided, must unite, long united must divide, thus it has ever been."
Wow.
That profound philosophical framing was entirely a 17th century addition by Mao Lun and Mao Zonggang. They wanted the reader to understand that this wasn't just a story about one war, it was a story about the cosmic inevitability of human rise and fall.
It's incredible how much a masterful editor can shape the legacy of a work. And because the narrative became so tight and resonant under their pen, these historical figures didn't stay confined to the pages of a book. They leaped off the page and embedded themselves into the culture.
Absolutely. The text functions as a shared cultural vocabulary across East Asia. Even today, the proverbs derived from the novel are ubiquitous. Take the English idiom, speak of the devil. The Chinese equivalent is a direct reference to the novel.
Oh, right. It's speak of Cao Cao and Cao Cao arrives.
Exactly.
I love that so much. Instead of invoking Satan, you invoke a hyper-competent 3rd century warlord who has a habit of showing up right when you are plotting against him.
Precisely. It speaks to Cao Cao's terrifying omniscience in the text. There's also a wonderful proverb regarding Liu Bei's chief strategist, a man named Zhu Liang, who is depicted as this solitary, unparalleled genius. The saying goes, 3 reeking tanners overcome 1 Zhu Liang.
Or 3 cobblers, depending on the translation, right? It's basically saying that a few everyday, blue-collar workers putting their heads together can outsmart the most brilliant, solitary mind of a generation.
Yes, it democratizes the concept of genius. And then there are idioms born from specific, hilariously botched schemes.
Oh, like the Zhao Yu one.
Yes, the phrase, losing the lady and crippling the army, comes directly from the text. A rival strategist named Zhu Yu attempts to use a fake marriage proposal to lure Liu Bei into a trap. But through a series of brilliant countermaneuvers by Zhu Jiwang, the trap spectacularly backfires.
So what happens to Zhao Yu?
Well, Liu Bei escapes safely, the marriage actually becomes real, and when Zhu Yu tries to pursue him with an army, he is ambushed and suffers heavy losses.
He literally lost the lady and his army was crippled. It's the ancient equivalent of congratulations, you played yourself. But the cultural imprint doesn't stop at slang. We have to talk about how this novel crossed over into the metaphysical realm. Because from what the sources detail, this book literally changed the religious landscape through the deification of Guan Yu.
This is one of the most remarkable phenomena surrounding the text. As we discussed, Guan Yu was a real, historical general known for his martial skill and deep loyalty. He was eventually captured and executed. But in the novel, his death isn't just a battlefield casualty. It takes on a profound mystical significance.
Okay, set the scene for us. What happens in the novel after Guan Yu is actually executed?
In Luo Guanzong's fictionalized account, Guan Yu's spirit cannot find peace. He basically becomes an angry ghost. He wanders to Jade Spring Mountain and appears to a Buddhist monk named Pucheng.
And he's looking for his head, right?
Yes. The ghost is crying out, "Return my head, return my head." The monk, remaining perfectly calm, looks at the ghost and reminds Guan Yu of his own violent past.
Oh.
He points out all the rival generals that Guan Yu himself had beheaded in life. Pu Jing asks the ghost, "If you want your head back, who will return their heads?"
That is a phenomenal rhetorical question from the monk.
It really is, and it completely shatters Guan Yu's anger. In that fictional moment, the ghost comprehends the relentless karmic cycle of violence he perpetuated. He achieves sudden enlightenment, bows to the monk, and vanishes.
Okay, I have to pause here because the mechanism of this is blowing my mind. We have a real historical guy who died a real historical death.
Right.
Centuries later, a novelist invents a fictional ghost story where he gets schooled by a monk, and because of that fictional scene, Guan Yu is currently revered as a bodhisattva in Buddhism and a powerful deity in Taoism and Chinese folk religion.
It's incredible.
Wait, so a fictionalized scene in a novel literally helped elevate a historical general into a recognized deity. How often does pop culture actually rewrite a religion? It happens because populations naturally merge folklore, history, and fiction when they need to process complex moral lessons or collective trauma. The dry historical record of Guan Yu's death offered no comfort. It's just a brutal execution.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the novel offered a framework. It provided a story where loyalty is rewarded with spiritual enlightenment and where the cycle of violence can actually be broken. The story became reality because it was culturally necessary. It provided a moral compass that the raw facts simply couldn't offer.
So the fiction was more useful to the human soul than the truth. That makes total sense. And that utility, the usefulness of this text, is what allowed it to cross borders and centuries.
Absolutely.
Because when you look at how different groups of people use this book over the last few hundred years, the diversity is staggering. Let's pivot to the 17th century, to the Manchu founders of the Qing dynasty. How are they engaging with a 14th century romance novel? They're using it as a literal weapon. Before the Manchus conquered China, their chieftain, Nurhaci, realized that to defeat the Ming dynasty, his people needed more than just cavalry charges. They needed advanced political and military strategy. So they turned to the romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Wow.
In 1650, it became one of the very first books officially translated into the Manchu language.
So they didn't read it for the prose. They literally read it as a textbook on how to conquer a nation.
Exactly. Because the novel meticulously details supply chain logistics, psychological warfare, diplomatic betrayals, flanking maneuvers. The Manchu leaders studied it to understand the psychology of their enemies.
It was an operational manual disguised as entertainment.
Yes, exactly. But then you travel across the border to Korea, and the text transforms again. It goes from an invader's playbook to a symbol of national defense.
Right, during the Imjin War, right.
Yes, its adoption in Korea is fascinating. During the Imjin War in the late 16th century, Japan launched a devastating invasion of Korea. And amidst the chaos, the novel surged in popularity among the Korean people.
I remember reading a folk story about this. A Japanese general had a nightmare or something.
Yeah, there is a historical folk account where a leading Japanese general has a terrifying nightmare. In the dream, the spirit of Guan Yu appears, fiercely threatening him for daring to invade the Korean state.
The Chinese deity acting as a supernatural border patrol for Korea? That's wild.
It perfectly illustrates the cultural blending happening at the time. The Ming Emperor of China actually intervened and forced the Korean leaders to build grand temples dedicated to Guan Yu.
Like the Dongyo Temple in Seoul, right?
Exactly, to solidify this shared spiritual defense against Japan. Now, the Korean ruling class initially despised the novel. They viewed it as trivial fiction filled with historical lies that just distracted the youth.
But the commoners loved it.
They embraced it deeply.
Why did the common people love it so much if their leaders hated it?
Because it is fundamentally a story about underdogs. It's about loyalty in the face of overwhelming corruption, and about surviving the collapse of authority. For a Korean populace suffering through a brutal invasion while their own leaders struggled to protect them, the themes of resilience resonated profoundly.
That makes total sense.
That eventually became entrenched in their culture. To put it in a modern context, a 1988 translation of the novel by the author Yi Mun-yol has sold over 20 million copies. It is literally the best-selling novel of all time in Korea.
20 million copies of a translated medieval text. That is staggering.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because the evolution of this text hasn't stopped.
Not at all.
If we look at what is happening on the internet today, the novel has mutated into something that I guarantee a 17th century Manchu warlord could never have predicted. Let's talk about the fan fiction.
You're referring to the online community, specifically the explosion of boys' love, or BL/fanfiction, being produced largely by young Chinese women.
Yes. You have this massive community of writers taking these stoic, hypermasculine warlords and strategists and placing them into intense romantic and sexual relationships.
It's a really fascinating phenomenon.
It is. The most popular pairings usually revolve around the virtuous Liu Bei and his brilliant strategist Zhu Liang, or the rival warlord Cao Cao and his obsession with Guan Yu. How did a military epic become the foundation for modern internet romance?
It comes down to how modern readers interpret historical tropes. The original novel is intensely focused on male relationships, brotherhood, loyalty oaths, and lords trusting their vassals.
Right.
In the historical context of the text, Liu Bei had a well-documented habit of sharing his bed with his top generals.
Which, historically speaking, was a political statement. Like, if I'm the warlord, inviting you to share my bed means I trust you implicitly not to slit my throat in the dark. It's the ultimate display of political trust.
Correct. But to a 21st century reader, two men sharing a bed while having deeply emotional conversations about loyalty, well, that reads very differently. Scholars who study this point out that these fan fiction writers are actively exploring themes of soft masculinity.
Soft masculinity, meaning they're subverting the traditional tough guy image.
Exactly. They take the intense, almost overly romanticized descriptions of male loyalty from the text, and they intentionally subvert them.
So they aren't just misunderstanding the history, they are deliberately hijacking it.
Exactly. It's a way for young women to take a hyper-masculine, patriarchal text, a book historically used by men, to justify war and political dominance and engage with it on their own terms.
That is so clever.
It really is. They transform the political discourse of the novel into a discourse about emotional vulnerability and sexual dynamics. They essentially strip away the battlefield armor to examine the deeply flawed human relationships underneath.
The contrast is just breathtaking. You have a 17th century conqueror reading the book to learn how to sever supply lines and slaughter enemies.
Right.
And you have a 21st century internet user rewriting those exact same characters to explore emotional intelligence and modern relationship dynamics. Same book, same characters, completely different universes of meaning.
It's true.
So what does this all mean? How does one stack of paper stretch that far across the human experience?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals the true genius of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. At its core, it isn't actually a book about Han Dynasty history.
What is it about, then?
It is a comprehensive study of human ambition. It maps out the complex, often tragic ways people navigate power, grief, loyalty, and survival.
Yeah, those themes are universal.
Exactly. The text is so expansive, and the psychological profiles are so richly drawn that it acts as a cultural mirror. Whether you are a general looking for a tactical advantage, a conquered citizen looking for hope, or a modern reader exploring vulnerability, the novel reflects back exactly the aspect of human nature you need to see.
We've covered an unbelievable amount of ground today. We started with a pile of 3rd century historical records.
We did.
We watched a 14th century playwright turn them into an epic, and 17th century showrunners edit them into a masterpiece. We've seen how this text generated our daily slang, literally created a recognized deity, taught warlords how to build empires, became a symbol of national resilience in Korea, and continues to be subverted by modern internet creators.
That's quite the resume.
It really is. It is a living, breathing text in every sense of the word. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a story that refuses to be forgotten.
Before we go, to truly appreciate the enduring weight of this narrative, this relentless cycle of history, I want to leave you with one final proverb that was born from the culture surrounding the novel.
Oh, I love a good proverb. Let's hear it.
The saying goes, "The young should not read Water Margin, and the old should not read Three Kingdoms."
Okay, Water Margin is another classic Chinese novel, right?
Yes, it's packed with outlaws and rebellion. It is simply too full of fiery defiance for a young, impressionable mind.
That makes sense. But why shouldn't the old read Three Kingdoms?
Because this epic is a relentless, tragic parade of dynasties rising to spectacular heights only to invariably crash into ruin. It is a stark, unyielding reminder to those in their twilight years that absolutely nothing we build is permanent.
Wow. Which brings us right back to the beginning. Capturing a century of history in a single narrative doesn't just show us the heights of human achievement. It forces us to reckon with the reality that eventually every empire falls. Until next time, keep digging into the sources.